Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today we are checking out Bricky's Every Faction in Warhammer 40k Explained. This is my second video on this. My first video covered the first 12 or so minutes of this awesome lore vid, right? It's like a great summary of the Warhammer 40k Imperium lore and universe. But it's extensive, right? It's an hour long, so I'm kind of breaking it up into parts. But before we get started, if you too ever wondered if the Custodes armor was made of real gold, hit that subscribe button. And of course, be sure to hit like on the video. Tell that YouTube algorithm that I'm making good stuff. And of course, check out my Instagram, check out my second channel, and check out my store. I've got merch now. I hired some designers. They've got some pretty fun t-shirt designs, and I'm adding more every single week, so definitely check it out. And once you've done all that, let's get into it.
Through sheer numbers and firepower. They kind of have this World War I, World War II style aesthetic with legions of guardsmen as well as high company commanders and generals on the field along with them, and multiple kinds of troops. A normal Imperial Guard battle starts off with artillery, long lines of artillery, cracking the crust of the planet underneath the enemy's feet. And as this barrage continues, hundreds of thousands of guardsmen, a sea of guardsmen surges forward, firing and charging at everything possible while the planet rumbles as tanks roll up behind them. Gunships block out the sun and tanks block out the dirt with the steps and hoofprints of millions of guardsmen. It is through numbers and sheer sundering firepower. They are the first and last line of defense for the Imperium and make up a huge bulk of the battles. The Imperial...
So here's what's kind of interesting about this tactics that he's describing. Sometimes they're called human wave tactics, and they kind of have a reputation of being really unsophisticated. And you know, the famous ones are, of course, the Soviet Union in World War II, having hordes and hordes of conscripts sort of charge at the Germans. And it may be true that those happened, but a lot of times those are exaggerated for, like, kind of propaganda purposes. The North Vietnamese army had similar tactics where they would, do these human wave charges at bases. And while it's true that not every army treats human life as importantly as some Western armies do, it's unfair to describe it as being a unsophisticated or uncomplicated tactic. Of course, the other example being World War I, right? And I think they're a function of a few things. One, close maneuver tactics are hard to do, right? Where you carefully coordinate ground troops and air assets and indirect fire. And to do it well, you have to have a lot of communication equipment. You need to have a lot of radios. You need to have a lot of training. You need to have everyone working together on the same frequency, right? But you can't have too many people on the same frequency, right? You have to be able to communicate quickly to your artillery, to your gunships overhead, you name it. And it's hard to do that at scale, and it's hard to do it without a high level of technology, right? You need a central command post to kind of receive and understand and relay out all the orders, and that can just be tough if you're talking about something like the Imperial Guard, where, again, it sounds like their level of equipment is not very high. And there's also just the effort required, right? Planning advanced tactics for 1 million people is just hard to do. You know, famously, the operations order for D-Day at the top level was only 7 pages long. And that's because you want to have a simple strategy that every stakeholder in your operation can understand and follow. And so, you know, you needed something that would be comprehensible to the British, the Canadians, the Air Force, the Royal Air Force, the Navy. They all had to have an understanding of the plan, and so that meant it had to become extremely simple. And I imagine that if you're the Imperial Guard, you lose a ton of troops. The squad you fought with, or the company, or the battalion, or the regiment you fought with yesterday might have taken 90% casualties, and today you're in a brand new regiment, right? So you can't have these very advanced tactics that require a ton of training and a ton of time to get spun up on. You have to have your training be so simple that even if you just throw together 10,000 guardsmen and tell them, hey, you're doing the charge tomorrow, they already have to be able to understand the operation. Got it. Every operation looks the same, they say. We charge on the whistle, the artillery fire stops, or the gunships rake the enemy in front of us, and we push. So that's sort of the efficiency of simple tactics.
The Imperial Guard is also made up of tons of different kinds of regiments. The Catechin jungle fighters live in a death world that's more hospitable than...
Okay, every world in Warhammer is a death world, buddy.
Almost any firefight they'll ever get into. So they just have this steroid-looking, giant knife, Rambo Predator-looking sons of bitches, where nothing is anywhere near as scary as a simple knight on their home planet. You have the Valhallan Winter Soldiers who haven't felt their toes in 300 years, the Mordian Iron Guard who are more interested in making their shoes shine than actually fighting a battle. And
okay, here's what's interesting. That is also drawn by a number of historic troops, but probably the most famous is on the outset of the Civil War. There had been building over a couple of really decades, but a couple of years prior, there had been a sort of militarization or a fetishization of the military that happened in, again, the pre-Civil War United States. And as a result, you had these strange parade military units spring up that were dedicated mostly to very elaborate parades, beautiful ornate uniforms, often custom done. Some of them weren't really even like fully federal military units. They were like state militia types. But it really reflected this vanity and romanticizing of war and the military. And, the Civil War famously quickly chewed these units apart because of just how unbelievably useless they were, right? They spent their whole time training to be parade ready instead of combat ready. And they did not last long in this new warfare environment. There are several units in the First World War that had a similar fate. Units that were just living in the past really existed as, again, a parade unit, not a combat unit. And so, wars tend to have these cycles where units become obsessed with their appearance and their, ability to sort of look cool and sexy and ready, and real war has a way of grinding them out.
And then, of course, the big one, the Cadians from Cadia. The biggest export of guardsmen in the entirety of the Imperium. You will fire your first gun at 5. You will disassemble and reassemble it at 10. You will have pounding artillery drills day in and day out at 15. And you'll fight your first swarm lord at 16. And if you mention Cadia, you will...
Okay. Yeah, child soldiers. Definitely something that in the modern era we view as pretty unethical. But the truth is that when wars are fought in this highly automated way, it's a conflict, we're going to say. Because on one hand, right, you need a very, very smart soldier to fight modern warfare. They need to be able to operate not just a radio, but they need to operate their computerized Blue Force trackers. They've got to operate, calculate artillery fire, understand the protocols, know the 6 different weapon systems they're given, be able to signal in infrared and maintain, $1 million worth of individual soldier equipment, right? So you need an adult to do that. And on the other hand, of course, adults have reached their full strength and stamina, and are most physically able to handle the rigors of combat, right? So for most of history, adults are the primary fighting unit, adult males, really. Again, a function of the fact that it was a stand-in for strength and stamina. But in the 20th century, right, where instead of having to be a strong man who chops your enemy with a sword, anyone strong enough to pull a trigger can kill an enemy. And in the age of the vehicle, you might not even need them to march a long way. They can ride in a truck or in a lorry or in a car. And so you ended up with these oftentimes guerrilla forces, oftentimes informal militaries that would recruit child soldiers to do fighting. And it's seen as a pretty severe war crime violation now, but it hasn't stopped people from doing so. Because teenagers are pliable. They're easy to manipulate. They're easy to indoctrinate. And they're easy to coerce. And that's why most developed countries forbid using soldiers of that age.
Will burst into an unrelenting amount of tears and sadness like I do daily. To quote, "I have at my command an entire battle group of the Imperial Guard, 50 regiments including specialized drop troops, stealthers, mechanized formations, armored companies, combat engineers, and mobile artillery. Over 500,000 fighting men and 30,000 tanks and artillery pieces are mine to command. Emperor, show mercy to the fool that stands against me, for I shall not." The Imperial Guard are my personal favorite faction in 40k. They're the army I collect the most, the ones I enjoy playing the most, and the one I enjoy in the lore sense a lot. There's something about just a regular man with a laser rifle being told to charge the horrors of this universe and willingly doing so for his god emperor. It's just poetic. They actually...
okay, I'm just going to point this out there. In a way, right, Astartes live, 500 years, 1,000 years, right? Longer if they get interred into a dreadnought. It seems like the human beings are the only... they're so frail and so fragile that it's almost like... Also, they feel fear, right? Astartes don't feel fear anymore because of the genetics. But yeah, it sucks. You're a regular-ass guardsman, right? You live a tiny, tiny sliver of what an Astartes would. Your body is utterly frail and breakable, and yet they still pick up a gun and charge a Tyranid or an Orc or a Tau for some reason. Yeah, it is. It's kind of courageous.
Represents the main Imperial Guard tactics pretty well. Large amounts of artillery that doesn't require a line of sight, lots of tanks, tons of infantry, drop troops, and gunships. Overall, they're pretty similar to how they sound, though a little bit expensive to collect, unfortunately. And they don't hit a lot. They have a bit of a bad aim, but you don't really care because you're just drowning them in shots. However, if you want more accurate fire and specialization, we can move on to talk about Spetsmarines.
Okay, just going to make one last comment about accuracy. Again, I'm really getting the vibe from hearing this that the Astra Militarum just relies on cheap, easy-to-use conscripts. And that's because even here in the future, right, conscripts are famously bad shots. And that's because they often, as their government gets more and more desperate to field troops, they slack on training more and more. In the last couple of really year or two of the Spanish Civil War, right, that took place in the 30s, the Republican troops, as they were kind of getting crushed and routed, they were going to the front with as little as 4 days of training. In 4 days, you can maybe teach them like gun safety and how to operate the gun, but in order to deliver accurate fire on the range, let alone accurate fire in combat, would have been almost impossible, right? So you were at that point, they were so desperate that they were just basically sending untrained soldiers to the slaughter. And it sounds like that's sort of the Imperial Guard's MO. I'd be curious to know in lore, are the tanks and artillery also designed to be like childishly easy to operate? Like if you just have all your operators get killed, you can pull a random person and just stick them in front of an artillery piece and be like, just follow the directions on the artillery. Like, that's how it should be designed if this is how they operate.
The Angels of Death are up next. Space Marines are genetically engineered super soldiers and superhumans. They're given extra organs, their skin tissue is toughened, their bones are stronger, they're taller than the average person. They're pretty massive people, and these are the specialized super soldiers that carry out a lot of the more specific tasks for the Imperium. And there's tons of legions of them. In fact, there's one per Primarch. Each Primarch, the Emperor's son, as I mentioned before, oversees their legion of Space Marines. The genetic upgrade they get is based on the genes of said Primarch. It's something called a gene seed. That's what brings them up to this like superhuman level. As stated, each Primarch has their own legion. Robot Girly Man has the Ultramarines, Jagatai Khan has the White Scars, Rogel Dorn has the Imperial Fists, Corvus Corax has the Raven Guard, and there's a whole bunch of other side sections that are also extremely...
I'm just gonna wait. Yeah, okay, so genetic engineering in soldiers. This is considered pretty unethical by modern standards. There are some rumors that places and people like the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, have allegedly done some of these things. But again, with an army, as we see here, it's hard to scale, right? To go through the intensive process, you know, in modern days, right? It would be almost impossible to perform in vitro genetic engineering on an army's worth of troops, right? Because you would have to do so not 10,000 times over, you would have to do so like 500,000 times. You would have to have a factory dedicated to basically gene editing. And it would be so expensive that, and also it would create a bunch of risks. And I've read a little bit that supposedly these risks kind of manifest in Warhammer, but when you have a genetically similar population, right, they can often be subject to diseases, conditions, and just general genetic weaknesses that aren't readily apparent. You know, imagine if the classic example would be like you have this population of, again, genetically identical super marines, ultramarines, regular marines from their Primarch, and nobody ever realized that one disease on a particular world happens to just crush them. Right, 89% mortality rate, you know. Well, if you have a breakout of that disease in your barracks, every one of your super soldiers is now dead. In contrast, if you have a genetically diverse population in your military, yes, 10% will be completely crippled by this disease, but maybe a third will be able to just get a little sick and shuck it off without treatment. And maybe another 10% will be almost entirely immune, right? This is the advantage of having a broad level of diversity among your military. It's also just easier logistically to sit there and go, hey, here's 15, 20 conditions that we're going to screen out. Instead of saying, hey, we're going to screen in every gene hand-selected that we want to deliver these traits. You know, it's also, again, an intellectual liability. And obviously a human being is a product of both their environment and their genes, but if you have the same people with the same exact experiences and the same genetic predispositions, then you're going to get these results being the same over and over and over again, right? In contrast, when you have commanders with not only different experiences, but different temperaments, different genetics, you're more likely to find a commander who can see and solve a problem in a different way than what you're thinking of. You know, again, the classic example of being, you know, in the Cold War, right? The U.S. had promised, they said, hey, West Germany, we will defend you. We will never allow you to be conquered. Well, that's a problem. Because the Soviets, their battle plan, the U.S. knew, NATO knew, was to invade right over Germany. And most conventional tactics at the time said that you basically give up Germany and buy yourself time to fight them in France or whatever. Well, the U.S. needed the U.S. couldn't figure out how to do it until finally some outside-the-box thinkers came in and they said, hey, why don't we create a brand new battle doctrine? We're going to call it air-land battle, and it's going to be when the enemy pushes into us, we counter-thrust deep into them. We use these attack aircraft to hit their supply lines and communication lines. We're going to use lightning-fast armor to push and shatter through their lines. Like when they invade, we are going to hit them hard and deep and fast. And it should, if it's done correctly, actually cripple them before they can take over Germany, right? But it required a level of thinking, and that's what the U.S. ended up settling on, and it became really effective in the first Gulf War, right? You saw it completely obliterate the conventional Soviet-style Iraqi army. But to settle on those tactics, you had to have these really different thinkers. You couldn't draw in these old World War II Korea vets to write down how to fight a war, because they would have told you the same thing. Retreat, 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 and buy yourself time. It took a new thinker, a new way of thinking to change and come up with the new tactics. And again, when you have this super homogenous, same experiences, same genetics, same temperament, same disposition, you run into doing things the same way over and over and over again.
Interesting and have a little bit more of a twist on the average Space Marines, which we will discuss in a bit. Humorously enough, I don't have a whole lot to say about Space Marines. They're superhumanly fast. In fact, it's been said that nothing that large should move that quick. These men in power armor moving at blazing fast speeds, their reflexes are faster, their skin is tougher. They are overall just extremely powerful soldiers. In fact, where they differ comes down to which Space Marine Legion we're talking about. For instance, the Ultramarines done by Robot Gilliman are the main blue boys, strong in almost every way, the jack of all trades kind of group that are a little bit too strong, and that's a lore problem, but the White Scars by Jagatai Khan are all about speed freaks, go fast. We're talking attack bikes, we're talking land speeders. You want to go in quick, you want to hit them hard, you want them to be swarming around like buzzflies, buzz saws.
See, again, this idea that you combine the same genetics, the same experiences, and you get these very homogenous ways of fighting. Now, imagine if you have to fight against these White Claws or whatever. Raven Claws. White Claws. They're going to be White Claws. They'll always be White Claws to me. Alright, so you got to fight the White Claws. Well, you know what they're going to do. Look at them. They're famous for it, right? They've been doing the same thing for 10,000 years, right? So imagine that you're going to be prepared to counter that. Now imagine you had someone who had a different thought process, and they said, hey guys, you know what? We're going to do a defense in depth. Well, now you've completely thwarted your enemy's plans, but you had to think differently.
With the speed of buzzsaws. Fuck you, Pale King. Salamanders love fire. Fire in the forge, fire in battle. Flamers, melta-guns, multi-meltas. Just so long as something can be burning, that's big. And they're also actually some of the nicest of the Space Marines. A lot of Space Marines have this kind of like holier-than-thou thing because of their genetic strength. However, the Salamanders...
Also interesting, you know, one of the, in fiction at least, the, you know, when someone lives a long time, or becomes very powerful, or some combination of the two, right? They sort of get disconnected from regular human beings and humanity in general, and that sort of makes sense, right? Imagine if you had to see, you know, every year guardsman after guardsman that you served with fight and die horribly, and you just lived on and on and on and on for 700, 800, 900 years, or however long a Space Marine lives. And you almost will have, the only way to psychologically deal with it is to make yourself pretty aloof and callous and disconnected from them. You know, famously, you have some of these, the military in Myanmar, right, who unfortunately appear to be killing a large number of civilians in response to protests. One of the reasons they think that the military is able to do this is because in Myanmar, the military lives completely separately from the civilians. They have a separate capital, a military capital. They live on these isolated bases. They're actually encouraged only to marry other soldiers, or in the case of high-level general officers and promising young military officers, sometimes other members of the elite. But you have this completely separate world that they live in, and then as a result, it disconnects them from civilians. Right? Even the term civilians is seen as something a little bit less than, a little bit beneath you, right? You are something more than a civilian. And so I imagine to a Space Marine, every guardsman probably looks like, and mostly is, a civilian with a las gun, you know? So that logically is going to produce a type of Space Marine, a type of soldier that views, you know, pretty condescendingly the normies of the world.
Tend to put human lives above the lives of themselves, which is actually rather rare. They're also all black, but not like just regular black, like 2 a.m. line at a White Castle black. Like they have a charcoal, dark, ashy exterior.
Sorry, is he describing their armor, or they are a chapter whose gene seed included like melanated skin? I'm confused.
And blazing red eyes. Apparently something about living on their home planet of Nocturne, which I don't know if that makes much sense, but who cares?
It doesn't make any sense. On Earth, nocturnal animals that don't get exposed to sunlight, generally turn white. You can see it, like there's a couple of these like types of crabs that evolve deep in the ocean or in lightless caves, and they turn completely white.
This is like fantasy land anyway. Overall, Salamanders are actually one of my personal favorite legions because they're just really cool. They're fun to play as because of all their flamer weapons, and they have a nice, like, more heartwarming lore as opposed to being super evil like everyone else is. Oh my god, we're not even a quarter of the way through the Space Marine legions. Imperial Fists believe in the power of the siege and defensive positions. Raven Guards, master of stealth and sabotage while having bird helmets. Iron Hands, masters of machines and vehicles while being really goddamn good at being sold on eBay after one nerf. Space Wolves, Vikings and wolves and tons of wolves and axes, battle axes, fur everywhere. Space Wolves. So
yeah, okay, some of these chapters, they're making them sound like pretty weeaboo-y.
Angry.
Like the Space Wolves, definitely designed by a 13-year-old.
Big teeth, Blood Angels, the genetic defect to make them want to drink blood and go crazy, called the Red Thirst. They have Cupid wings and stuff, which is a little bit strange, and they are all super gay for Sanguinius. Dark Angels are...
Sanguinius, oh my god. Well, yeah, if you're a blood drinker and your boss is named Sanguinius, it's right there. It's like if I had a boss named, like, Fresh Baked Pecan Pie, I couldn't stop myself.
For old school knights and inner circle theme and...
Are you a heretic?
Me? No, never. Once in a blue moon, I know.
Death Watch, a fancy-pantsy anti-Xenos group that nobody plays because Death Watch, and they look cool though, but no one plays them. I don't know about Death Watch. They're there though. Black Templars, for the people who, if you haven't prayed at least 3 times a day, you're gonna start praying out that airlock. And I'm sure there's some other chapters I may have missed as well, like Crimson Fists and stuff. But
isn't the aren't there like 1,000 chapters? He's not doing a good job. Like, you guys in the comments have actually been better about this because, right? It's Primarchs get their own legions, but then after the Horus Heresy, they said, hey, nobody can have one entire legion, so instead, 1,000 million chapters.
Those are the main ones right here. Here, quote, from the Emperor himself. They shall be my finest warriors, these men who give of themselves to me. Like clay I shall mold them, and in the furnace of war I shall forge them. They shall be of iron will and steely sinew. In great armor I shall clad them, and with the mightiest weapons shall they be armed. They will be untouched by plague or disease, no sickness shall blight them. They shall have such tactics, strategies, and machines that no foe will best them in battle. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are my defenders of humanity. They are my space marines, and they shall know no fear. And on the tabletop, they fuck. Oh, they fuck hard. As of making this video, Space Marines are laughably strong. That might change at some point, but overall, Space Marines just have it's like a Swiss Army knife, a tool for anything you need, except it's like a gold-plated Swiss Army knife. It is extremely strong. If you are actually getting into the tabletop of Warhammer, Space Marines are a great start. Also, whatever gameplay style you have, whether you want to be sit back with long range and heavy weaponry, go fast and run in, or even just full melee, all of these options are totally there for you. Space Marines are super badass, but unfortunately, it's time we start praying to our new god, the 2011 Honda Civic.
Okay, all right. This is a great logical stopping point. Again, this is like a fire hose of information. It's great. Bricky is super entertaining. I really appreciate that he makes it entertaining, but still kind of covers this. And I appreciate that he integrates the tabletop, which is another dimension that I really know nothing about. But the more I learn about Warhammer, the more I want to paint little Marines. So, again, let me know in the comments below if you guys know any good videos that'll help me get oriented to tabletop play as a total noob. Of course, be sure to hit like on the video if you enjoyed it. Check out second channel, Instagram, merch store. The link's below. And I think that's it. Thank you guys for watching. And I will see you next time.